All right. Hi, Brian. Great to see you.
And Chris, thanks for having me back. Nice to see you again.
Yeah. So today we're going to connect again. We get a ton of questions on a lot of the webinars and masterclass that we run. And there's just so many questions that come in during the live session. We can't get to all of them. And so part of this is just you and I to really engage in a conversation and get some more information out there for our audience to be able to really think strategically about how they use technology, particularly around facilitation. So let's jump in, Brian, and kind of go through some of these questions. So first question I'm going to pitch to you, Brian, is how do you facilitate skillfully where the tech tools actually enhance the conversation versus being somewhat distracting or perhaps dominant to people? So what do you think, Brian?
Well, my first reaction is that I'm honored that people actually took the time to ask us additional questions. I think that's a good sign. When it comes to using tech tools in a way that's fluid and transparent, let me just give you an analogy. So like right now, I'm teaching my sons how to drive, which is
Mm,
an adventure all by itself, right? So, I have to say, all right, we get in the car, we close the door, you buckle your seatbelt, you put your foot on the brake, you turn the key, let go of the key, right? All of these things that we do naturally, for them, it's very, very mechanical. It's very algorithmic. You got to do this, 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 and this, right? Fast forward to where I'm at, probably where you are. It's like, okay, I can be driving down the road and eating a sandwich and texting and reading the newspaper all while I'm on the freeway, right? My point is that, we don't have to think about driving, okay?
right.
It becomes automatic. And ideally, with any of the platforms or pieces of software that you use, you want to get it to the point where you don't have to think about how to do something. You just say, okay, I know what I want to do, and I know how to do it. You want it to be transparent. I think that that's the first part of the question, is that you want to get it to a place where it just becomes automatic. You can forget about the technology and focus on your facilitation. The second part of your question is a little bit more interesting. And you said, how do you get to a place where you can be fluid? And so, with all of these different platforms that are out there.
Right.
Um, I don't know about you, but have you ever been on a call where, let's say that it was a Zoom call, and like half the people that dial in, they're like, we're not used to Zoom, we use Teams, or
Yeah. We
vice
use Google
versa.
Meet. Exactly.
We
Yes.
use Google Meet, right? So what I would say when it comes to that kind of thing, I think the best thing that you can do is to be agnostic, okay?
Mm,
Is to not get hung up around one platform versus another. And so, that means that you kind of have to get outside your comfort zone and use, if you're a Zoom person, use Teams every now and then. If you're a Teams person, use Google Meet, right? Just get enough flexibility around the different systems that are out there that you don't find yourselves stuck on one or the other. So be agnostic. The other thing is that tools are changing really, really quickly. There used to be this amazing tool a while ago that was called Board Thing. And Board Thing was this brand new idea where you had this collaborative digital whiteboard where you could move stickies around. Does that sound like
mm,
anything familiar to you?
yes.
And then all of a sudden, like Board Thing goes away, and anybody that was using it was like, oh my gosh, what's going to be the replacement? And then here comes Mural, and here comes Miro, and here comes, Google. What was that Google one that we had for a while that's now gone? We won't even say it. But the point
Right.
is that like software comes and goes. So I think that the best thing that you can do is to be agnostic. Okay.
Yeah. I love that, Brian. When I think about this question, I think the first thing is come up with a couple buckets. Like one of them is really know your audience, and so I think to some perspective, I would say like to skillfully facilitate requires like you know your audience. So as an example, if you're going to facilitate a small, intimate conversation with your team, and everyone in your team is very skilled with technology and up to speed, and they've used Mural or Miro before, that would be a very easy choice, right? As
Right.
opposed to maybe some sort of large group interaction with some international global board, and you're not really familiar with these people's levels of, experience with these tools. That would be a very different selection. So I think understanding your audience, understanding what's going to work for them is really, really important. The second thing I would say is, as a facilitator, once you've made that conscious choice of we're going to use XYZ platform, whatever it is, I think it's really important, particularly if people have never used it before, to start slow and give people the big picture by just describing what it is. So to your point, Brian, using language like this is a digital whiteboard tool. Sometimes it's as simple as just saying like Mural is a digital whiteboard tool for people to say, oh, now I understand what it is. Because if we just start with the technology and they've never heard of that platform, sometimes people can get very confused because they feel like, oh, I don't know all the details of it, versus just sitting back and saying, Google Meets, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all of these are video conferencing platforms. And it gives people a little bit more comfort. So that's my sense there. I think maybe the third thing, final thing I would add would be just the power of visuals. I think when it comes to facilitation, one of the things I think you and I both align on, Brian, is it's just so important for people to see ideas and see concepts. And so it's less about being super fancy when it comes to your facilitation and more about just letting people understand and absorb information in a visual way so they understand what we're talking about in the conversation. I think that's critical.
You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, let's go to the next question, Brian. I think there's a second one that came in. Do you want to go through that one, take the lead there?
Sure. What was that one?
So that one is all about hybrid, right? So how do we equalize the experience with hybrid, right? That's a common challenge today. More and more organizations are working hybrid. And so what's your sense around hybrid?
Okay, so how do you create, and you said, how do you equalize the experience across hybrid?
That's right.
Okay, so this may be an unpopular opinion, but mine is, frankly, you can't. By design, hybrid is set up to be inequitable, and I mean that very literally. It's almost like saying, okay, let's get everybody into the room together, but half of the people, we're going to have you sit 20 yards away, and you can only participate one at a time, and you have to raise your hands. And by the way, you can only look at the meeting through a soda straw, okay? So by design, a hybrid meeting has inequalities that are built into it. Now, most of the time when I say that, my clients say, yeah, but our boss says that we have to be hybrid. And so when I hear that, my recommendation is to say, all right, well, what is it that's driving you to be hybrid? And is there any reason that we can't do all of this virtually? Okay. What exactly is there to be gained by having some people on the outskirts, right, of the meeting versus some people that are on the inside of the meeting? Because again, you are setting people up to participate unevenly. Now, having said that, if you have clearly defined roles where there are some people who are in listen and receive mode, then they can be hybrid. That's perfectly okay. And if you have people that are in the room and they are going to be your decision makers, and that's also okay, assuming that the people in the room are okay being inside a fishbowl, right? Because sometimes you hear that, well, that limits conversation. And maybe they're not quite as keen to speak their mind and to share their sides of the beach ball when there's somebody that's like looking in on them like a panopticon. But more than that, I think it's very rare that you find yourself in a situation where you can delineate by roles and by mode of participation like that. So anytime I get somebody who says, let's do a hybrid meeting, my first reaction is to say, well, why do we want to do that? If it's just because of some policy, what's behind that policy? Well, the boss says that we have to be together, but we got this one guy who's in Saskatchewan. Okay, fine. If that's the case, let's all do this virtually. Now, if they really don't want to hear it from me and they have to do it hybrid, I send them a proposal for hybrid. And oftentimes they are surprised when my price for doing a hybrid meeting is 3 times what it would be if I
Right,
were to do
because
it
there's all the
virtual.
complexity and prep that you've got to put in and extra enhancements to make it really, really effective.
Yeah. So I tend to use price as a bit of a poison pill for that. But it's true because I tell them, listen, I have to design 3 meetings. I have to design the virtual meeting. I have to design the in-person meeting. I have to have people that do that. Plus I have to design the engagement between those 2 different groups. So yeah, it's going to cost you 3 times as much.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, Brian. I would say from my perspective, that power dynamic that you mentioned absolutely is there. And I think under the surface with hybrid, when clients say, let's do hybrid, I think under the surface there, they're trying to harness that in-person experience that's hard to replicate online. We know that. We know that from a social perspective. And they're saying, oh, well, we don't want to lose that in-person dimension, right? We want to mine that in-person dimension, but just adding in a couple people remote makes it way more complicated from that power dynamic perspective. So I'm with you on, if you can avoid hybrid and go all remote, that's probably the best way to do it. But we know that that's not the reality. And sometimes clients say, no, we have these people, there's 5 of them, they're in a room. We've got that one person, in Saskatchewan as an example. How do we deal with that? Like, we're not going to change and move that person physically to where we are. So I think my sense of like, how can you make hybrid more equitable? You got to start with the interaction process. So I'll give people some very quick tips that I personally have seen work really well with hybrid. I think if you're facilitating a hybrid meeting, one of the best things you can do to kind of raise that equitable standpoint, especially with the remote person, is to actually involve that remote person first. So instead of just asking questions to the group, where very quickly the in-person conversation can evolve into this roundtable conversation, actually ask that remote person who's in Saskatchewan, John, I'd like to hear from you first before we bring in the in-person. So I think the order of how you call on people, the order that you engage people, that's one way. I think the second thing I would say, to your point, Brian, on the interaction, it's interesting that you talked about designing 3 meetings, one of them being the in-person, one being the remote, is I would actually double click into that and say, what sort of interaction do you actually expect between the in-person and remote people? Because if the reality is we don't actually want any interaction between them, then you actually really are designing 2 different meetings. But if they say, oh, we want 3 people around this table to then talk to John, you've got to really think about, okay, well, what does that look like? How are they going to connect to John? Do they have to be on their laptop? Do they have to log in? I think there's some simple things you can do if you're in hybrid, like just having chats. Like, maybe we have 10 people in a room and we have 5 people online and we are running hybrid. And maybe we tell people, bring your laptop. We're using chat as the way to have the conversation. So everybody is at that equal playing level from a communication standpoint. We've got to think through those dimensions.
You just reminded me of something that I'll sketch out for you that I learned from Interaction Associates many years ago. That's been something that's really I've brought with me into my facilitation practice, and I use it all the time. Is that when getting back to your point of, let's start with the guy who's online, right? Is that when you do something in the room and you see where people stand, right? And let's say that you've got the majority of folks that are over here.
Yeah.
Uh, when you invite them to share their ideas and draw out information, you start with the minority opinion. You start with the folks that have less representation in the room, because you do want to hear their side of the beach ball, right? You do want to hear what they have to say, because it may be those folks that are not falling into groupthink that may have that leap that is going to take the organization into the next thing, that paradigm shift, or they may see something that will avert disaster.
Right.
So thanks for reminding me of that one. That's been a good one.
Yeah, I think the tech is so important. And this is why hybrid is so complex, because if you have the technology, you can definitely enhance the meeting, right? If you don't
Mhm.
have the technology, it makes it much harder. So as an example, if you're running a hybrid meeting, everybody absolutely needs to be able to see the same information. We
Mhm.
can't have some people drawing on a physical whiteboard with just like a camera pointed towards the whiteboard, like hoping that the remote people can like see that webcam like clearly and see the marker being written out. I think we'd want to be more creative and say, okay, if we are going to do a hybrid meeting, we've got to be on some sort of digital platform, or maybe we are writing digitally, but it's cloud-based, where those remote people have a clear lens and a view of the information. It's kind of getting people on that same playing field. I think that's really, really important. Great. Awesome. Okay. Last question, Brian. So this is around organizations. We're getting a lot of questions on how people can use artificial intelligence. So we know AI is really a hot topic now. And so the question that came in from one of our listeners is, how can organizations balance the advantages of AI coupled with those concerns that they may have around security or confidentiality or ethical use, particularly when it comes to having those virtual conversations? Like, how do you do that? And how do you also understand the risk and liabilities of using some of that technology?
Yeah, I really like I think the key word there is balance. And the thing that makes me that this makes me think of is that I think that this is really a philosophical discussion in a lot of ways. And I think about the discussions that you hear a lot of organizations have between, on the one hand, risk versus reward, right? So are we going to be really risk averse? Are we going to be very careful? Are we going to err on the side of security on the one hand? Or are we going to potentially have a higher risk, and as a result, maybe be in a place where we stand to benefit a little bit more? So I have, for example, two clients right now. One of them actually puts food products in grocery stores, right? There's something that it's something that probably everybody has used at some point. They don't iterate fast. They changed their packaging maybe once in the last 50 years.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and the reason for that is that, anytime they make a change, they've got to go through the Food and Drug Administration,
Yeah.
they've got to, there's just the economies of scale are so huge that any small change like that, it would just be, it'd be astronomical. So they don't iterate quick. I have another client that does mobile apps for the iPhone, right? Basically video games, right? They don't care about breaking their software at all. They'll push an update out there and they're like, whoops, we just broke the game. Don't worry,
Right.
we'll
They're on
get
a
to the
totally
next
different
update.
side of the spectrum there. Yeah.
Totally different side of the spectrum, right? So I think what's important is that organizations take a look at their culture, first of all, and say, where do we stand on this spectrum? Okay. I think what's likewise important is that you don't necessarily default to the most secure option, because the most secure option would be to not use it at all. Let me tell you something. AI is not going to take anybody's job. People who are using AI will take the jobs from people who are not using AI. But AI is not sitting out there saying, oh, there's Bob. How do I take his job? That's not going to happen. What
Right.
this really means is that the people who are going to be using it, those are the folks that are going to come out ahead. So regardless of how you see yourself, what your job is, I think it behooves you to practice a little bit of curiosity. And by the way, I'm unfortunately old enough now to remember when we've had this conversation before. It wasn't too long ago when organizations were struggling about the extent to which they were going to use this fancy new thing called the internet. And what happened is the internet just became a tool like any other. My belief is that AI is going to be the same thing. And the extent to which organizations and companies use it well, that will be their competitive advantage, or at least it'll have them keeping up with the pack.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And it speaks to like change, right? Change is always happening. New technologies are always going to be developed and introduced. But at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, particularly with facilitation skills, really does come down to the fundamentals. And I've seen a lot of this where I see a lot of leaders that are really excited about technology and using technology. And I say, great, try it on, experiment with it, learn with it, push the boundaries. But also remember at the end of the day that a lot of the success of your facilitation really is going to depend on those fundamentals, those timeless truths about what are we trying to accomplish, who needs to be involved, what's the process we're going to use. The technology is just an enhancement, like you mentioned. It's just a tool to get there. I think we have to really remember those fundamental pieces and not be afraid of using AI, but at the same time, be realistic that AI is not going to totally radically change everything on our organization, including our meetings. It's really a tool that we can use creatively. And as facilitators, we have to be mindful about when to use it. I think if I were to double click on the second part of the question from this viewer about security and confidentiality and privacy, I would say as a facilitator, one of the easiest things you can do is just get alignment with people in your meeting that we're going to be using AI. For example, maybe AI is helping taking meeting notes, and that's super important, and everybody understands that. But also understand that at a certain point in a meeting as a facilitator, you can pause the AI and say, we're about to talk about a private, sensitive employee situation that our organization doesn't allow AI, or we don't want AI to be trained on this. And so just pause the recording, pause the AI tool in that moment and go more of an old school route. So I think people have to understand it's not a binary, like we're either using it or not using it. Think about AI as maybe like, how can I inject part of my meeting with AI? Maybe it's in the collaborative part, maybe it's in the generative part that I want to use it. But when it comes to some of the more tactical things that we need to talk about, maybe it's actually not appropriate, and it's can be even distracting for that moment. So thinking through that lens, I think, can be quite helpful as well.
Couldn't
Anything
agree
else
more.
you'd want to add, Brian?
I'm reminded of the old phrase, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, right? And I think that there's a lot of fear around AI. And if you really take a look at the people who are afraid of it, they are people who haven't used it. And
Right.
if you use it, you realize that it's not Skynet, right? It is not smart enough to threaten you or your job or your kids or whatever. I think that what AI gives us is a slightly smarter, slightly faster hammer. It's not going to build the house for us.
Yeah, you still got to have the blueprints and you got to be able to get the tools and assemble the people to build the house. It's not going to build it by itself. And I think that's a great frame. Great. Well, Brian, this has been super fun. Thank you so much for joining me and going through some of these listeners' questions. Super helpful and always fun engaging with you.
Thanks, Chris. Next time, my place.
All right. Thanks.